And again, good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give it one more minute for folks to join us. Thank you for joining the webinar today for Supportive Housing Week. We'll just get started in 1 minute. Okay, I think we'll get started now. Again, good afternoon. My name is Jesse Dean. I'm Director of Strategic Communication at CSH, and you are attending CSH's webinar on Supportive Housing Week, taking place on the week of August 24th through the 28th of this year. And we'll just have a notice for participants. First, I'll say, yes, we are recording the webinar, and we will share the webinar with those who have registered as well as posted on our website. And we also have a notice for participants. We do not allow screen recordings or use of images taken from these slides. And if you have any questions around that, you can write us at info@csh.org. Your attendance is, in terms of the terms of participation, your attendance to this webinar signifies that you agree to these terms. So we appreciate your cooperation and not recording or taking screenshots of this webinar. We will share this recording with you in the next day or two. And so what are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to briefly do introductions for my colleagues who are online with us. We'll give a brief overview about CSH, and then we're going to dive right into what is Supportive Housing Week. We're going to talk about what you can expect for Supportive Housing Week site visits, why they matter, and how to host. We're going to talk a little bit about messaging. It's going to be a brief overview. We're going to have another webinar in July on messaging, but we'll touch upon that briefly. We'll also share the resources that are available to you at today, as well as the resources that we are going to be developing over the next several weeks. We're going to talk about how to participate, key dates and next steps. And lastly, we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions. Please use the Q&A feature in the Zoom to submit your questions. So for introductions, again, my name is Jesse Dean. I'm Director of Strategic Communications here at CSH. I have with me Melanie Kershun. She's Associate Director of Strategic Communications at CSH. Shannon Nasworth of Nasworth Consulting, LLC. And Shannon is also previously was the President and CEO of Ability Housing, headquartered in Jacksonville, Florida. So we're delighted to be working with Shannon on this very important Supportive Housing Week event. Not pictured and not with us today, unfortunately, is my colleague, Kara Mergel. She's Director of Government and External Affairs, and unfortunately she had triple book today, so we'll give her the afternoon off, and you'll definitely be in touch with her on future communication. So about CSH, we work to support many of you on this call. Actually, there's a lot of familiar names that we saw on the registration list, and so we support you to develop, fund, and operate supportive housing. We also help communities understand that supportive housing is an evidence-based solution to visible homelessness and for people managing complex health needs and barriers to stable housing. And we do the support in 3 ways: through training, consulting, and technical assistance. Secondly, we provide loan products to kickstart supportive housing and affordable housing development. And we also offer allocations of new market tax credits for the service facilities associated with supportive housing. So those are all very exciting projects, and we work with providers across the country. And then lastly, we provide creative, smart, and effective policies and support the advocacy of these policies. Since our founding in 1991, we have invested more than $2.2 billion in communities and have helped to create or preserve more than 502,000 supportive housing units for individuals and families, exiting long-term homelessness. I'm pleased to turn it over to Shannon, who will talk about Supportive Housing Week.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Jesse. So as Jesse mentioned, I'm Shannon Nasworth. I am the former president and CEO of Ability Housing. We were an affordable and supportive housing developer serving Florida. And I decided to retire after over 20 years at the end of last year. And then this opportunity came up and I left retirement almost immediately. So, but this is really important. And I appreciate so many people being on this webinar. I think it's fabulous that you're here and the interest that you're showing. So thank you. So what is Supportive Housing Week? As discussed, it is the week of August 24th to 28th. There's a slight typo on that slide. It is actually the entire week. It is the first time CSH has put together a nationwide effort like this. Candidly, I think we all realized, at the end of last year with all of the advocacy efforts that were going on around homelessness and the COC, that we really needed to re-engage with our elected officials and combat the narrative that we know is not true. For years and years, supportive housing was a nonpartisan, all parties supported it, common sense solution to many societal challenges for our most vulnerable neighbors. And unfortunately, over the last few years, it has gotten sucked into the vortex of some negative narratives. And we realized that we had stopped having the conversations with our elected officials, and it was time to re-engage with them so that we could make sure that they were engaged and educated as to what supportive housing truly is, and also so that they'd have resources in their community should they hear information that they wanted to call and find out more about supportive housing or whatever policy was being presented to them. So we decided, or Cara really, decided that it would be great to take a week during the recess. Congress always recesses in August. Take a week and ask providers around the country to conduct tours to all elected officials in their district. We really wanted to have the members of Congress see in their own district, live and in person, what supportive housing truly is and the impact it's having on the community. In reality, a lot of things that elected officials at the national level have to deal with are very abstract concepts. We want to make supportive housing a live human person and place that they think of whenever somebody mentions it, so that it becomes a very real thing that is important to their community and their constituents and not an abstract concept. So that's why we picked recess, because that's when the most number of members will possibly be available to do a tour. We also wanted to help facilitate relationship building between you as the provider and our elected officials. It's really, really important to have ongoing relationships. When a crisis hits like the COC budget issues that came up last year, it's so much better to already have a relationship with your congressman or senator's office than to be calling in cold. Go ahead and call in cold if you don't have the relationship, but now that there's not a crisis on hand, or at least as big a crisis at the moment on hand, start building the relationships, and this can be the foundation of working intentionally to build a relationship with your representative and senator, because those ongoing relationships are what will make a difference on the national policy level. The ultimate reason we're doing that is we want to turn those legislative persons, our senators and our representatives of all parties, we want every one of them to become a champion for supportive housing, both when policy decisions are being made and when appropriations are being made. But we also want to remind them this is a nonpartisan issue. It is something they've all supported because it is a sound human rights and humanitarian issue, but it's also a very sound fiscal issue and addresses many societal concerns. And so we really want to take it out of the context of the bipartisan or the bipartisan infighting, I guess, is the right word I'm looking for, and debates that go on at the national level, and really return it to a nonpartisan issue. Allison, can you advance? Thanks. So the key messaging, and we'll go into this far more in depth regarding this, is that supportive housing is a proven person-centered solution. It's really important that they understand what supportive housing is and isn't, and the impacts that it have. And you can see here, and you all know the impacts. I'm not going to read these slides to you. And those are incredibly important, both at the human and the community level. It's important to the individuals that we're serving, the individuals that need the supportive housing. It's important to our healthcare systems, our criminal justice systems, our psychiatric and behavioral healthcare systems. So many youth aging out of foster, I can go on and on and on to the systems where it's really important at the systemic level. But it's also important at the fiscal level, because we know all these things interplay with each other. And if people don't have an affordable place to live with the supports they need to maintain their independence, they're going to be cycling through much more costly systems of care and utilizing resources that could be better deployed in other ways. So we just really want to reinforce that why supportive housing is the common sense solution that it has been for so long. And Jesse, I'll turn it over to you to discuss why site visits matter.
Thank you. And Allison, I think, yeah, perfect. So my colleague Kara, like I said, who couldn't join us today, she likes to say that Supportive Housing Week is like Hill Day in reverse. So if any of you travel to our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., and schedule meetings with your members of Congress, this is similar, but in your home district. And for a very obvious reason is it's likely that your supportive housing is in your home district. And the one caveat from Hill Day as this is not advocacy, this is education. And this is an opportunity to open doors to members of Congress so they can witness firsthand the value of supportive housing and how it enhances thriving communities. Members of Congress often hear about supportive housing from misinformation, news. They also hear, they may hear it from lobbyists, or they may not even know what it is. You are the experts. You know what happens in these buildings, and the people who are writing the budgets, who are writing the policy, who are your representatives, may never see supportive housing. So why not take this opportunity to invite them to see supportive housing working in your community? Supportive housing, we often create fact sheets and briefing binders and reports. But in fact, supportive housing doesn't live in any of those. It lives on a block. It lives in a neighborhood, in a community, in your congressional members' districts. So we want to bring it home. We want to bring supportive housing home to them so that it is no longer an abstraction or a misunderstanding, but it becomes a real place, and they see that it's a real home for people who need them. And at the end of the day, you and those of you who operate supportive housing and your tenants are your members' constituents. You're also a local employer. And so this is an opportunity not to share an agenda, but to invite them to see who they're representing in their community. The next slide, please. And so what do members of Congress gain when they make a site visit? Well, obviously that in-person engagement is extremely powerful. They see how supportive housing works in action, and they meet residents, they meet staff, and just imagine how powerful it is for them to meet a resident who says how valuable having a key to their own door is to them, and how it's been a catalyst to their recovery. They get to see as I mentioned, their constituents live, and they may walk in not understanding it or being reserved or have an impression of what they've heard from a lobbyist or from the news. But we willing to bet that when they leave that tour of a supportive housing site, that they will leave knowing someone's name. And the other thing, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the messaging, but this is an opportunity to connect your members of Congress to things that they really care about already, whether it's veterans, whether it's being fiscally responsible, as Shannon mentioned, whether it's rural, suburban, or urban health, or public safety. These are opportunities to know what is important to them and how you can show that supportive housing speaks to what they value and what their priorities are. And our expectation and goal with Supportive Housing Week is to make a shift, right? We want also to support or protect supportive housing rather by showing it in action. And we are willing to bet that when policymakers see it, the conversation shifts, and they will see how supportive housing works without anyone having saying it. You probably know of that internet meme that's gone around the past several years. If you how do you say blank without saying blank? Well, this is similar where, how do we say supportive housing without giving them a fact sheet? We show it to them live and showing their constituents in their communities. Next slide. And so we'll talk a little bit about messaging and why that matters. And as I said earlier, we are going to offer a webinar in July, late in July, about messaging. But as you begin to reach out to your members of Congress to invite them, this is an important thing to matter in terms of messaging. Again, as Shannon mentioned early on, this is not about advocacy. This is not about talking about their voting record. This is about showing supportive housing and how it works in the community. And so we feel that the site visits are for your members of Congress and the Senate and the House, and that it's important to engage them regardless of how you view them or their voting record. You may not love where they stand, or you may, but this invitation isn't about their record. This is about telling one story, is that supportive housing matters, but we want to open doors so that people from all different perspectives, members of Congress from all different perspectives, are invited in to see supportive housing in person. So for the messaging, we invite you to think about how do you build trust instead of triggering resistance. And if, for example, your particular member of Congress is not a fan of Housing First, that's not the way to start the conversation with them, right? So you don't want to mention Housing First if they're not a fan of Housing First, or even supportive housing for that matter. You want to start, as I said earlier, about what's important to them, what are the values, and how does your supportive housing facility address the values that they have. We want to meet them, those members of Congress, at their starting point, not ours. And so this is a really wonderful opportunity to connect. Like I said, I'm going to keep repeating myself, but connecting supportive housing to what they already care about. And also, we encourage you to try to avoid jargon, program names, and really just focus on what supportive housing does, how it enhances the community, how people have achieved stability, how they have achieved recovery, and focus on those outcomes rather than on program names or any other jargon that may confuse or alienate them. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon, who will talk about how to host a site visit.
Absolutely. And thank you, Jesse. Really appreciate that. So we're first going to start with a poll just to find out how many of you are planning a site visit. So if you can just answer yes or no, or you're not sure. Allison, you're going to have to tell me when we have our responses because I don't see anything on my side of the screen. Okay. Well, that's why you're on this webinar. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. That's why we're doing this. We're really interested in, meeting you where you're at and helping you decide if this is the right thing for your organization, because candidly, that's really important. So if you can go to the next slide, Allison. So there's a lot of ways for hosting a site. As I mentioned previously, I used to run a supportive housing organization, and we would do these. And, it was an investment of time and effort. I don't want to minimize that. You need to make sure you have the support of the organization and its leadership to do this. You don't want to do it without that. But we also know some of you have done this a lot before, and others, this is a totally foreign concept. And I'll be completely honest with you, the very first time I had to walk into a elected official's office, I told the group, I'm just going to stand in the back. I don't even want to say my name because it was very intimidating. And granted, that was a few years ago, but it was very intimidating. But, I came to quickly realize after just a couple of meetings, these are people who want to have a conversation and aren't any different than the rest of us. They just have a lot more responsibility than I'll ever want to undertake. And they're relying on us to keep them informed. And so that's why my organization decided to invest in building these relationships, focusing candidly at the state level in Tallahassee, Florida, but also working with our congressional delegation. So we've created, and Melanie will go over this, but I want to kind of share for those of you who are thinking about it. We created materials to help you understand how to first do the invitation, identify your appropriate elected official, do the invitation, all the steps. And there'll be more materials coming out as we get closer to Supportive Housing Week. But we assumed you had never done this before. So for some of you, you're going to be like, yeah, I can skip steps 1 through 5. I know how to do this, and you can jump in on step 6. For others of you, it is going to be, this is how you find out who the representative is that you want to invite to a tour. So that is the number one thing, is identifying and contacting your members of Congress. And do think about who would be the appropriate person. Do you have properties in the district of a key, influential person within our Congress? Even if they're not on a committee, if they're an influencer, it's important to get them on our side so that they're supportive of supportive housing. But maybe they're also on, an important committee, appropriations, THUD, transportation, housing, and urban development for those who don't live in this land, and, our other important committees. We really want to first and foremost try to get as many people in those key districts as possible. So if you have a property inside the district, that is really important, because senators, it's the whole state, they're pretty easy. For representatives, it's most impactful if it's literally within the boundaries of their district. So figure out which property would be best. And maybe it's, looking a little bit at what your representative is interested in. If they're really into veterans and you have a property that's serving a lot of veterans, maybe that would be the best one for you to pick. Be strategic, be tactical as well, and just really think about the audience is this elected official, and how do you best engage this person in understanding supportive housing. And again, there's going to be lots of resources, and Melanie will talk about this. There's a lot that goes into planning your visit. There's, there's both getting the site ready. There's also, can you go back, Allison? Sorry. There's getting the site ready. There's getting your staff ready. There's getting the residents ready, and that's a critically important component of this. There's your communications team. There's your asset management team, your property management team. There's all these teams that need to be part of it, or at least have representation. So you want to make sure, you're well prepared and have everybody assigned a role that needs to have a role. And you also have to make sure you have people dedicated to helping the residents through this, both finding people who want to engage with the legislator and those that don't, and kind of helping them understand how they don't have to participate in this in any way, shape, or form if they don't wish to. You should get permission from the office, and they usually tend to give it, but take photos, make sure it's okay with them to post to social media. follow up after the visit with, a quick email, just thanking them for coming, giving one or two sentences about what they, discussed while they were there. Whether it's they thought the communal space was really impressive or the certain program was really impactful, or they met the resident that just, touched their heart. Whatever it is, remind them of why they came and what they walked away with. And then use that to maintain communications with your member's office. So it could be just like, once a quarter, you send a quick update on one of the programs that they saw, or a program at another property, or, you have that resident Dixie that they met and they just thought that she was just, all that and more. And just, and Dixie had a really cool thing with Dixie's permission, and you have to get Dixie's permission, but maybe Dixie writes them and tells them how impactful it's been. And she just graduated or got her GED, or whatever the thing may be that might strike them as to how impactful supportive housing is. It could just be keeping them updated on what's going on in your local community. You all know the things in your local community that impact and are impacted by supportive housing. So just keeping them abreast of those things. You are the person at the ground level that can help them understand what is going on in their community and how it is impacting supportive housing, and how supportive housing is or could positively impact it. So it's really, hosting these site visits. That's the objective behind this. I do want to say, we know this 1 week is a target week. It's our first time trying this. Some people already have tours scheduled earlier in the month. That's okay. We won't tell you you can't talk about supportive housing. They may not be available during the tour, that week. Maybe their staff could come. Staff is very critically important. Sometimes even more important is building a relationship with the staff than with the elected official themselves. Or maybe later in the year, this summer is just booked already for them, but you want to build that relationship. So, while we are targeting this week, please realize, we're not rigid. This is an engagement and education strategy, and the key to that is always flexibility. And so with that, I'm going to turn it to Melanie, who's going to tell you about all of the resources that CSH is going to provide you to help make this successful and as low pain as possible.
Thanks, Shannon. Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie Crucian at CSH. I'm really excited to talk to you about the resources that we've already developed for Supportive Housing Week, as well as all of the resources that we're creating over the next, 2 months or so. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And I also just dropped a link in the chat that's going to go to our main landing page, which is where you're going to find all of these materials. I'm sure you've visited that page before, but it has all of these materials and then all of the other ones that we're going to be posting. So in a minute, I'm going to go over the ones that we've already created, which is that invitation guide, the planning checklist, and the social media toolkit. But I wanted to briefly just touch on what we've got coming down the pike, which is a nonpartisan framing guide, which is going to summarize the evidence for supportive housing and serve as a foundation for consistent and intentional communication. We've got a story banking template to help, authentically create and collect and amplify stories from people with firsthand experience with supportive housing. We've got more stuff related to the site visits themselves in terms of like checklists and more sample language for those follow-up emails, as well as a run of show template to just make it as easy and comprehensive as possible for you. So all of that is coming and more. And Allison, I just asked that you bring up that webpage real quick so we can kind of just look at it together. And as I mentioned, everything is going to be here, and our team has really taken the time to make this as easy as possible to use. We encourage you, if you haven't already, to do that sign up to receive the toolkit, which emails these resources directly to you and has them in your email box so that you just have them to save and bookmark and look at later if you can't look at it right at that moment. We've even got an online store where you can order some supportive housing swag, which is really exciting. Keep scrolling down, Allison. And then, as you go down the page, it's, why participate, get involved. And then toward the bottom is where you'll find those resources that we talked about. And of course, we'll have the registration for the July messaging webinar on this page as well as the recording to this webinar is going to live on this page as well. So you can reference it later in case there's things you want to return to. Thanks so much, Allison. We can go back to the PowerPoint. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is the invitation guide. Shannon already talked a lot about this, but when I say that this is very comprehensive and so user-friendly, I really, really mean that. It really takes you step by step on identifying your representatives and your senators. The back pages really talk more in depth around who those members of the committees that we were mentioning, the authorizing committee, who are the folks that write laws that establish or modify federal programs, as well as the people who are on the appropriations committees, which are the folks that fund annual federal budgets. And so those in particular are the members that we're really targeting. But again, we do want to encourage you to kind of think about who would make the most sense to come visit your particular site. Within that invitation guide as well is literally copy and paste sample language that you can put in your emails to these representatives. We highlight the portions where you replace, your names and the members of Congress's names. So again, we make it as easy as possible. Next slide, please. And then this next one, I really personally love this one, the site visit planning checklist, because it really, again, super comprehensive. It goes week by week, step by step, on everything that you need to basically prep for your site visit. Right now, we're in the invitation and scheduling stage, which goes through the end of June. And then throughout July is the confirmation and preparation stage. And then, at the beginning of August is that final preparation, again, going step by step, like making it as easy as possible to help you kind of plan this. And then it has information on campaign week, as well as, some advice on what to do after. So again, just makes it as easy as possible and gives you the opportunity to print this out, check off the things that you've already done or you're working on. And it's really, really great. Next slide, please. And then another personal favorite of mine is our social media toolkit. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat directly to that toolkit, which is also available on the landing page that I shared with you. But this is really great because even if you aren't able to do a site visit, we are still encouraging you to spread the word about Supportive Housing Week and also spread the word about why supportive housing works. You'll see that we have advice on how to take pictures if you are doing the site visit, or even just collecting stories of maybe some of your residents, again, like folks who might want to share their stories about supportive housing and how you can kind of tie that into this overall effort that we're doing. And then it goes in, by the phases, with the first being that we want to spread the word about Supportive Housing Week and encouraging other folks in our field to sign up. And also just spreading the word about, what CSH is doing and the resources that we're offering that might be, helpful for our partners in this. The next phase is about education, what I was just talking about in terms of exactly why supportive housing works. And we're going to be continuously kind of adding to that portion, talking about, a lot of the evidence that, really shows why it works and why it's a really great solution for our communities. And then finally, the third phase, which is really great, we also just have it as easy as possible, copy and paste for your site visits and those success stories, thanking your members of Congress for coming to visit. And within that social media toolkit is easy links to download and share graphics that we've already created. You're welcome to, kind of create your own as well. But we do try to, again, make it as easy as possible for you to engage with us. And we're excited to have you use that hashtag supportive housing works so that we can kind of see the messages across. And we do encourage you to also tag CSH so that we can reshare what you're putting out there. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll talk about them after. But I'm going to hand it back over to Shannon, who's going to talk about how to join Supportive Housing Week.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So the vast majority of you are not sure if you're going to do this or not, and you're on this webinar to find out if you want to. Perfect. That's why this exists. So there are a lot of ways people can participate. And thinking back to when I was the CEO and what are the considerations I would have when I was considering something like this. What I will say is CSH, this is an inaugural effort. We're hoping to do this every year and make it a routine thing. So if this year isn't the right year for your organization, that doesn't mean we don't want to talk to you for next year. But if this year is, it would be really wonderful because we realize that supportive housing is at threat, both from a policy and appropriation standpoint. And we really want our legislators to understand why supportive housing works and why it is as impactful and important as it is. So we really did make this as easy as possible for you. So there's templates for every phase of this, emails, checklists, you name it. We tried to make it so you had to create as little as possible. The only things there's also going to be information on legislators or the state and national data and all sorts of info sheets and things like that you can have available. So we're trying to do all that we can to make sure that we're taking as much of the load off of the process as we possibly can and making it as easy for each and every one of you to participate. But if doing a tour isn't the right thing, that's okay. But I would encourage you, if you haven't already, sign up. So you can get those materials that have already been created emailed to you, and you can look at them and see exactly how easy we're trying to make this for you. So please make sure you sign up. And even if you decide doing a tour isn't the right thing at this point in time, you'll still be getting the updates, you'll still be getting the information, and you can consider later in the year doing this, or maybe waiting till next year. So, please stay engaged with this. If you do decide to plan a visit, we will provide you all the resources and things that we can. It's really important that, as many people around the country do this so that our congressional members really understand this is a national issue. It's not an urban issue. It's not a rural issue. It's every community, every state really has a need for supportive housing. If you do land a tour, if you do schedule something, please email us. You have the email right there on the screen, and it's on the website as well. Please just email, let us know, let me know. I'll be the one getting those emails, the name of your organization, who you've invited for the tour, if it's staff or the member themselves, and when they're going to be doing the tour. We really just want to track and see how successful this work is. We really just want to know if the work that we gave forth and provided to you guys was the right stuff. So knowing how many people are able to schedule tours will be one benchmark for that. And if you're not, decided you're not going to, that's fine. Please continue tracking. But even if doing a tour isn't the right thing, you can be in communication with your elected official the week of supportive housing, letting them know how important supportive housing is, giving some local examples, just engaging them in supportive housing week without a tour. And then as Melanie issued, there's going to be lots of social media. So promoting it via social media, so we're raising overall awareness, will be really, really impactful. We're trying to make supportive housing back to that thing it used to be, the common sense answer to helping our most vulnerable neighbors avoid costly systems of care and have the dignity and independence that they so well deserve. So please help us help our elected officials truly understand what is going on and what isn't. And I will also say, as Melanie mentioned, there's plenty of swag on the site, so feel free. And as an incentive, the first 5 participants who confirm a visit will be eligible for free supportive housing swag. So if you get the visit first and you send me the email, and it's going to be based on when you send me the email, then you will be on the list to get free swag. So please, jump on this as quickly as you can. And I hope we can expand it beyond 5 personally, but if not, check it all out because there's really good materials there. And even if you're not doing a tour, maybe some of your staff would like it or something like that as well. So there's a lot of good stuff going on. There's a lot of good information. And, after all this wraps up, if you do or don't decide to do it, we're going to ask for your feedback. If you did do it, how did it go? What happened on the tour itself, but also what could we do differently to make this better in the future? And if you decide not to do it, why didn't you? And what is it possible that CSH might be able to do differently in the future? And again, it may just be it's not the right fit for you, and that's totally fine. This isn't the right thing for everyone. We're just really trying to increase the entire industry's capacity to engage our elected officials and have them truly understand the benefits of supportive housing for the individuals that we serve, for the communities that they serve, and for the country and the systems of care that are so costly to our tax dollars. So with that, I believe we are turning it over to, we're going to start some Q&A. We have some key dates and you'll see them in the timelines. Obviously, the sooner you can invite, the more important it is. August is not that far away. And so it's really important to get the invites out as quickly as possible with as much flexibility of the date within that week as possible. You will get all of this when you get the toolkit emailed to you or go onto the website and download it yourself. Melanie went through the timeline. Summer will be when we're sending lots of information about how to prepare the site, how to prepare residents, how to prepare staff, a run of show, how to get everything ready. And then August will be obviously focused on those final touches, the materials that you want to have for the briefing packet that you're going to give to the member or their staff, and what you're going to do when you're done beyond celebrate, because I think the first most important thing is celebrate that you did it. So with that, we're going to open it up to Q&A, and I believe, Allison, you're going to let us know what the questions were. Is that our structure?
Sure. So one question that came in was if you could give any advice to folks where maybe there's an election coming up in their community. Should they be inviting those candidates? What's your advice on that?
I would say yes. And candidly, while we have target members of Congress because of their current committees standing, you never know what committee somebody's going to be posted to next year. So anybody and everybody, whether they're a strong contender to becoming elected in this upcoming election, or if they're on a committee that isn't impactful to supportive housing right now, maybe in a year or two they will be. So I think invite anyone that you think would benefit from understanding what supportive housing is. And if there's an election and you have somebody who's not been elected before, or maybe this is their first national election, building this relationship before they get into their office can be very impactful. And so it will be very beneficial. But Jesse, Melanie, any additional, feedback you have, please contradict if you disagree.
Shannon, I actually agree with you. It's always a wonderful opportunity to share the impact of supportive housing. And if someone has an interest in running for public office, why not introduce them at the beginning of their public service career? So I agree with you.
Okay, great. And would you say that extends to other local and state elected officials? Should this be an opportunity to reach out to folks in those positions as well?
Absolutely. I would consider whether you want to have more than one elected official on a tour, but if maybe doing a national one isn't the right thing, or you want to do more than one, or you're a large organization with properties in many locations and you want to do them at different sites, yes, we want all elected officials at the state level, at the local level. One, because these are career paths and eventually they'll be at the national level or potentially at the national level. But also the local policies really matter. The decisions that your city or county commission are making are very important. Your state legislature and their decisions are very important. So yes, and engaging them in Supportive Housing Week is critically important. So please, any engagement is better than none. Jesse, you agree?
I agree. I would say, we're focusing on the federal delegation members at this time, which is your House and Senate members, because of policy shifts and ongoing budget conversations that are happening that are affecting supportive housing. So because what what comes down at the federal level impacts what's happening in the funding in states. That's why we're focusing at the federal level. But again, by all means, if there's an opportunity to engage a state policymaker who also votes on funding for services and housing in your state, it's a wonderful opportunity to engage them as well.
And I'll also say that your local state delegation especially can be very influential in calling your federal delegation.
That's right.
If they're, if you're unable to get through, sometimes if you have that, state senator or state representative who calls up to your, federal senator and tells them how important supportive housing is, how important and impactful this is going to be to your state, your community, they'll listen. Elected officials will listen to other elected officials. So having those relationships can also be influential and beneficial for federal policy as well.
That's right.
And the only other thing that I'll also chime in on this to say is that, we are focusing on this effort in particular. We had mentioned it kind of at the beginning of the webinar, but this is when those congressional members are in their home districts, right? So it's an opportunity for them to come and be on your turf as opposed to you having to go into their offices. So really just trying to take advantage of that opportunity when these folks in particular are home in August and in particular this week. But yes to everything that Jesse and Shannon said as well.
And I will say the vast majority of the materials we're preparing, you might have to change dates, but it can be used for any elected official, any tour at any time. So.
All right. In an ideal world, can you explain to me what a site visit would look like? Maybe a quick glance at what the run of show might provide, and about how long would you anticipate a site visit to be on average?
So time is, the most finite resource any of our elected officials have. So candidly, I would offer a half hour and be ready to get less time. But sometimes I'm not saying you can't get longer, and be prepared if they get real talky. I've had that happen, and it ends up being, an hour and a half of really diving into local issues and supportive housing and various things. But offering up as a half hour, you have a higher probability of their being able to accept the invitation because their time is really tight. And even briefer, is also an option. A basic tour, and of course, every site is going to be a little bit different, but basically, you have a you put up signs where they should park, and you make sure they have parking right up front, and you put up little signs. You have somebody who's designated as your greeter, who's just keeping an eye out to make sure they've arrived, goes out and shakes hands and welcomes them in. Again, it will really vary by your property, but you'll take your property well in advance and walk it and figure out what is the best way to walk this property. What amenities does it have, or programs does it have that will be especially important to this particular representative? So think about, are you going to want to show them the after school program if you have that, or the, workforce development program if you have that, or the early learning center like we had at one of our properties. It could be the other, community amenities that you have available, just, walking them through the residential buildings so that they see that these are apartments like everybody else. They're not different than other people live in. Ideally, you'll have a vacant unit. Well, not ideally, but if you have a vacant unit, have it available for them to go in and see. If it's furnished, fabulous. If you can't, that's totally okay. Most of the times when I did this, they were not furnished and it did not matter. And if you have a resident that's willing to show them their apartment, that's great. That's very stressful to have strangers come into your unit. So you're going to want your staff to make sure that resident is genuinely comfortable with it and helps them prepare for the visit. But we have had residents that really were excited to have their congressman come and visit their home and see where they were living. Again, we always like to offer to our residents to participate. And it's always 100% voluntary. More than once somebody is, 5 minutes beforehand said, I'm sorry, I don't want to do it. And that's totally okay. But if they do want to do it, having a staff member that's there to help them in advance and day of prepare and be ready. And if they get nervous, just be there to be their, sidekick and support through the process. And then you just, wrap it up in, I typically would wrap it up in some sort of communal space that was close to where they had come in so they could get out to their car. I would have sitting available. So if they wanted to sit down and discuss it more, we could do so. But if they were on a rush, we would hand them out the briefing packets if we hadn't given them to them when they arrived. Usually we gave them to them beforehand, but on occasion for reasons due to the local member, we would give it to them before they left. And then we would just thank them profusely. I would say make sure you get the names of all the people that come with your member so you know everyone who was there. And and then you can look up their email addresses and things like that so that you can personally reach out to them and thank them. In advance of the tour itself, the biggest issue is making sure the site is ready. You're going to want to walk it more than once. You're going to, especially when you get to the week of, you're definitely going to be walking it because the last thing, we had one with a major tour coming up, and for whatever reason, the geese decided they were going to do their business all over our courtyard. And it was not what we wanted our representatives seeing. So we had a mad dash scrubbing party trying to make sure that the walkway was, not unsanitary. So you are going to want to have people ready the day of just for those last little minute things that come up. But that's, a basic run of show, and it really will be focused both on the property, your organization, the programs that you're offering, the populations that you're serving, and the member that you're trying to engage. But it doesn't have to be a daunting experience. It's great if your board chair can be there. It's great if your CEO can be there. If you have key partners that are especially aligned with the member, that's great. If their local hospital is a huge partner of yours and this member is very involved with healthcare, and that hospital representative isn't going to go off into left field onto something totally unrelated, it's great for them to see the impact that it's having on another system of care. If you can't have a member from that, having a story about how impactful it is really helps. But there's preparation. I don't want to underscore that. I don't want to downplay how much preparation is needed because you want it to go well. But it's not as overwhelming as the first time we were getting ready to do what we thought it would be. And Jesse, or Melanie, if you have any other suggestions, please.
Yeah, I think you covered it well. I actually have a follow-up question for you, Shannon, and you touched on this, but in terms of when you hosted site visits with your congressional members, did you connect them with any tenants, and how did you prep your tenants for those conversations?
Yes, we frequently connected them with tenants. And so if we had a program that was going on, a workshop or, something that was a group activity going on at the time of the tour, we would check with the class beforehand to make sure that going into the room would be okay. If they did not want to be interrupted, we would mention what was going on and then, tell them that we weren't going to be going in to respect, the workshop and the people participating and that kind of thing. But frequently almost always we had a resident who really did want to, or more than one resident that really did want to tell their story, who wanted to be heard, who wanted them to understand the importance. And so we would have one of our support staff who would just, be dedicated to the person, to meeting with them, talking with them, making sure that they understood what it meant and what it didn't mean, that it's not an hour-long conversation, that it's just a quick share your story, but also be receptive if there's more questions and that kind of thing. Having forms, you want to make sure you have your forms so that you document the resident volunteered to do this activity, and then checking in with them periodically to make sure they're not getting nervous about it. It sounds like a great idea in July, on July 4th, it's fabulous. August 23rd, you're a day out from the tour and it starts getting really, you want your staff to be there to tell them it's, if this is too much, that's okay. Like, this is all about you and you telling your story. If you don't want to, you don't have to. We can tell your story for you if you want us to, or we can tell a different story. But it was really, we especially were very, very driven by wanting to empower our residents to be part of it, but it not be a dog and pony show. Did I answer your question, Jesse?
Yes, thank you.
Were there more questions?
I think that'll do for our questions. So
Oh, good. We have 5 whole minutes left. Awesome. We timed this perfectly. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Here's how to stay in touch. I hope you are able to do the tours, and if not, please participate in whatever way that you can. It has been great seeing you, and I look forward to hearing from you and your success in Supportive Housing Week, whether it's with a tour or other. So thanks so much.
Thank you.